goosebumps, I remember, as she said it. And I was like, Zamość? And then the next question was, oh, did your family survive in Russia? In the Soviet Union?
You're listening to Radio Free Mike. Welcome to Radio Free Mike, the podcast about freedom and its discontents. My name is Michael Scott Moore, and today we're talking to not one, but two guests, a journalist, Daniela Gerson, and her partner, Talia Inlender, who's an immigration lawyer here in Los Angeles, where they both live. Daniela is the author of The Wanderers, a new book about both of their families, especially their Jewish grandparents, who all escaped the Holocaust, not together, from eastern Poland by heading east into the Soviet Union, which is a little bit odd. And the coincidence they discovered about their family histories will blow your mind, I promise. We talk about some World War II history and about how the past is not really past. Daniela and Talia, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So it's great to talk to both of you. And I want to, this is such an enormous story. I want to just get started with some basics. Daniela, you're the author of this story. Talia, you're closely involved. But first, Daniela, tell me about yourself.
I am an immigration journalist by my background, which is actually where I first met you when I was in Berlin with Der Spiegel at one point. Yeah, reporting on immigration. And then I've also worked in the past few years a lot on sort of civic engagement and how you can use news to cross different backgrounds. And I'm a professor of journalism and editor at large at Zocalo Public Square.
At Zocalo, right. And Talia, who are you?
My name is Talia Inlender. I am an immigrants' rights attorney by background. I've been practicing in the field for almost 20 years now. I'm currently deputy director at the Center for Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA School of Law, and I am also Daniela's wife.
Exactly. So you're married, you're partners, and now my listeners can tell your voices apart, which is important. And you're both deeply involved in this story. Daniela wrote it, but you both researched it. You both lived part of it. And it's what's really important is that it comes down through your fathers. So, Daniela, briefly, who was your dad? And where was your father born?
So my father was Alan Gerson, though if you read the book, you'll find out he thought he was Abe Bloomstein until he was 12. But he was born, actually, and one thing I learned in the book was he was born Alec Gerson, according to his family, in a small town outside of Samarkand called Juma. And his birth certificate says Ilya Gershanovich, using a Russian name I'd never heard of in the patrimonial. So that's where my father was born, in Uzbekistan, in a small town with a name that I'd never heard of. In Uzbekistan. And he went on to become an international attorney in the United States. He moved to the States when he was 6 years old. And he was 6, according to his fake birthday. And he went on to work in the Reagan administration. He sued Libya for terrorism. And that's my father.
Yeah. He's the one who shook down some money from Gaddafi after that horrible
Pan Am 103
plane explosion, Pan Am 103 in 1989. So a significant guy. But the reason he was born in Uzbekistan is that he was born in a camp.
It wasn't a camp in Uzbekistan, but it was more like a refugee. No, so in Uzbekistan, they had been, we're winding the story a little bit backwards, but his parents were from this small town in Poland called Zamość, and they had fled east, been deported to Siberia, freed from Siberia, and ended up in Uzbekistan. And that's why he was born in 1945 in Uzbekistan. Okay. Later, they ended up in displaced persons camps in Austria and Germany.
Only after later the war. In Austria. Okay.
Well, you might be thinking about my father, Michael.
Yes, Talia, I was. I was. Your father was born in Austria in a displaced persons camp, I believe.
Yes.
And quickly moved to Israel. So tell me about
right.
your dad.
Exactly. So my father was born in 1948 in a displaced persons camp in Austria. Mm-hmm. And he his parents had been in the camp for several years before he was born. Mm-hmm. And in 1949 they immigrated to Israel, which was where he grew up, and he eventually in his early 20s came to the United States.
Got it. Right. Okay. So Daniela, you mentioned Zamość. Tell me about this town. It's actually quite an interesting town with a very colorful town square. Tell me a little bit about Zamość.
So Zamość was built as an ideal city. Like you think, mm-hmm. Your family's from Polish, you're Jewish, you think of this sort of shtetl town. Right. And it's this beautiful Padua, the North Italian town that was created as an ideal city. Mm-hmm. And it very early on, welcomed Jews, but specifically Sephardic Jews, with this idea of creating trade routes. Mm-hmm. For me, the town in some ways was mythical because it was where our family was from, but everyone who stayed behind was murdered by the Nazis. And so it also felt like this place that ceased to exist after World War II.
But it was relatively untouched by the fighting in World War II. So it's still as beautiful as Krakow.
Yeah, and so Hitler wanted to make it Himmlerstadt. It was mm-hmm. a beautiful city. It was most of the Poles were actually kicked out. Many were killed during the war. And the idea was to make it a Slavic homeland. And it was mostly untouched. So it remained quite beautiful till mm-hmm. today.
Right. And how long was it sort of an ideal city before the Nazis came along?
It was founded in the 1500s by Count Zamoyski. And mm-hmm. it, particularly with the Jews who were by the time our grandparents were born in the early 1900s, they were about half the population of the city. And by this point, they were mostly Ashkenazi Jews, but it had this proud history also of Jewish intellectuals. Rosa Luxemburg, the international socialist, she was born in Zamość. Ayel Peretz, who is perhaps less well known today, but at the time was incredibly well known as for bringing Yiddish literature to the mainstream. More than 100,000 people attended his funeral in Warsaw. He mm-hmm. was from Zamość. Yeah. And it was just a place with like a thriving civic life.
Mm-hmm. For centuries, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, incredible. And I had never heard of it before your book. I mean, and the idea that it's the third most beautiful city after, I would say second most beautiful city after Krakow. I think Krakow was a lot more beautiful than Warsaw, but I still like Warsaw. Subjective. And I had still never, and it has this wonderful square. Talia, describe the square, because you've both been there. Describe the square in Zamość.
Yeah, the main square in Zamość our children call Rainbow Square, mm-hmm. and that is because it is it's a large main square, like you would think of as a Zocalo, sort of in the
right.
the Latin American context. Huge main square surrounded by buildings that are of all different colors. So purples, greens, cornflower blues. The main city hall or city municipal building is on the main square. It has a large very tall clock tower, and it is a light purple, if memory serves. Mm-hmm. It's just an extremely colorful, vibrant, beautiful square.
Yeah, really, really surprising. And so, Daniela, this was part of your family history. You just knew that the family went back to Zamość, and you didn't know much else, right?
I knew the family was from Zamość, and I knew they had described it at times as a beautiful. Well, mostly I just knew they were from Zamość.
And then you two met in L.A. You went on a few dates, and then you realized you were both Jewish. And then what happened? You had a little conversation.
Well, we realized we were both Jewish, like, immediately.
Early, okay.
But we were at a random picnic.
It was not much later. The dates happened much later, or at least what we considered dates.
I had it out of order.
As soon as she said her name was Talia, I was like, "Oh, was your father? Are you Israeli?" So that came quick. And then initially, I thought she could be my source because I reported on immigration. She was working on in the jails with people facing deportation. But we were both dating men at the time, and at least for me, it took me a while until we got to a date and seeing that potential. But we were hanging out, and the third time we were hanging out with a friend, actually from two friends from who I knew from Germany, we started talking. Talia, you want to pull in what we talked about?
Well, I love how you tell this story. She said usually when she tells this story, she says we started talking about the Holocaust as to Jewish women tended to in their 30s. But we did. We came about it through a bit of a circuitous route. But yes, the topic turned to a trip that I had done in my teenage years. A tour de force of concentration camps, which was a rite of passage in some parts of the Jewish community called Marches of Living, for your listeners who are familiar. Yeah. And so we started talking about that experience, and Daniela asked me, "Oh, is your family from Poland?" And I said, "Yeah, they are." And she said, "Oh, where they're from?" And I said, "Zamość." And she it was, again, like I had never met anybody from Zamość. It didn't occur to me that anybody else could possibly be from this place that in my family also was like had ceased to exist.
Right. You knew the name. Yeah.
And it was stunning to learn that her family as well was from what I at that time assumed was like this black and white shtetl.
Yeah, right. And Daniela, what was your reaction?
I had goosebumps, I remember, as she said it. And I was like, Zamość? And then the next question was, oh, did your family survive in Russia? In the Soviet Union? Because I knew that everyone in my family who survived, and I knew at this point that it wasn't, that a lot of the people from the borderlands survived in the Soviet Union. But it was a natural question to me, like, oh, if they were from Zamość, they were Jews, they survived, it must have been in the Soviet Union.
Right.
And Talia right away was like, yes, in Siberia, they were in labor camps, right? Wow. Is that what you said? Cutting down trees. And then I asked her, oh, and then after that in Uzbekistan? And to that, she was like, I have no idea.
Right. So, yeah, incredible. So we're now talking about your father's parents. So your grandparents in both cases living in Zamość and then leaving because of the Nazis, but leaving to the east. And this is what's interesting in your book, Daniela, is that you mentioned that there was this whole phenomenon of Jews pushing east into the Soviet Union rather than anywhere else. There was some idea, it didn't last very long, but there was some idea that the Soviet Union would take in Jews and keep them safe from the Nazis. And both of your families did that. Tell me a little bit about that phenomenon.
Well, no other borders were open, right? In 1939, Palestine is giving out incredibly few certificates for visas for Jews to go. The United States is not letting people in, it's turning around most famously the St. Louis. And elsewhere in the West, it's similar. But the Soviet Union was open. And the border kept moving back.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this has been a free preview of this episode. And the whole thing is open to paid subscribers to Radio Free Mike. So if you'd like to hear the rest, please hit the link in your show notes or in the body of the email we've sent you and upgrade your subscription over at Substack. Then you'll be able to listen to the full episode on any platform. Thanks for listening.